Welcome to my channel, where OP finds out that he's not alone in his apartment. Our next Reddit post is from Throwaway24397, the man in the crawlspace. I'm a 31-year-old guy. About 4 years ago, I had just gotten out of a long-distance relationship and was feeling pretty down. These things are common in old houses in the Seattle area. You can access the attic from inside the house instead of going outside and getting on the roof. It's like a giant storage space. You basically have to duck walk to get around because the ceiling isn't very high. I opened the closet door, and to my horror, the crawlspace latch was slightly ajar. Whoever was up there had obviously pushed it open while getting in or out. Now I know it sounds stupid, but I always lock my doors. I triple check in the evenings. So when I saw that it was unlocked, I assumed that whoever had been in the crawlspace had snuck in somehow. I got my stuff back, and an apology from the cops, and a lecture from my landlord. Turns out that the guy up in the crawlspace had been living in there for almost 2 weeks. I used to rent a house in Oregon that had a crawlspace. The previous tenant must have dug an entrance into the crawlspace. Because when I moved in, I kept hearing weird noises. If there's a floor above that room, you should remove the drop ceiling and see if there's any way that the noise might be coming from above that room instead. Because if there is, I highly doubt it's a ghost. The water heater in the basement would turn itself off. Also hit that subscribe button, because I put out new videos every single day. Things would go missing and reappear elsewhere. And sometimes I would hear whispers or what sounded like arguments. I eventually gave up and just left the front door open all the time. Turned out that the previous tenant had just left a bunch of stuff in the crawl space, and some of it was magnetized. Some of it had come loose and was dragging along the metal pipes in the basement. The police eventually caught up with him and let him out with a stern warning. Apparently, he'd taken to sleeping during the day and being active at night. He was a bit of a hoarder and had brought those items with him from somewhere else. According to the police, he had no fixed address, but they believed that he was staying with friends and family. Most of the time, he would sneak into people's homes through unlocked doors or windows and steal food and other essentials. When the weather was nice, he would sleep in parks or wooded areas. But once winter started to set in, he sought warmer shelter in the crawl spaces of various homes. We believe that he was responsible for a string of similar incidents across the city. My front door opens onto the kitchen, and as I was making coffee, I noticed that my cupboards were wide open. I did, however, install a heavy-duty deadbolt on my front door. I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but apparently they'd been pushed open at some point. I knew then that I needed to call the cops. One of the rooms has a drop ceiling, and we haven't finished putting up the new ceiling tiles yet. Every night we hear what sounds like someone running back and forth above our heads, but when we go up into the attic, we don't see anything. And when we look up into the room below the drop ceiling, we see nothing. It's very creepy, and we're beginning to think that there may be an actual ghost haunting us. Any advice? I immediately called my landlord and told him what happened. He seemed annoyed and asked me why I didn't call the cops. I told him I wanted to talk to him first. He said that he'd send someone over to take a look. This crawl space was extremely dusty, so I left it mostly alone. Looks clear, he says, and starts to close the hatch. I stopped him and told him that I heard someone up there just a few minutes ago. They thought it was pretty funny and asked if I wanted them to investigate the cupboards. One of the officers crawled under my bed and found a pair of scissors in the dust. She brought it out and asked, "We got anything to write with?" I gave her a napkin, and she wrote down a list of every single item in my kitchen that was missing, including the brand and model number of my microwave. It was a perfect list. She then told me to wait here while she went to the roof to get in the crawl space. He looked at me and slowly closed the hatch. He then proceeded to climb on my roof, probably to access the crawl space from outside. I was skeptical, but figured that if there really was someone up there, they would have made a run for it by now. I would occasionally pull out some random junk and throw it away, but for the most part, I forgot it was even there. I decided to move up to the Seattle area for a fresh start. I got a job at a tech company, found a decent one-bedroom rental in Redmond, and started looking for furniture. Now, this place was super small. It had one large room where the bed, desk, and fridge all fit in awkwardly. There was a small bathroom and a tiny kitchen, but it was cheap, and the internet was fast. I took it. There was also a crawlspace hatch in the hallway closet. One day I noticed that my milk carton had been opened. That was strange. I live alone and don't drink milk. It wasn't a big deal, so I just chalked it up to an oversight. I told myself I was just hearing things. Then I heard someone sneeze directly above my bedroom. I sat up in bed and listened intently. More whispering, followed by another loud sneeze. Okay, maybe I wasn't going crazy. Maybe there really was someone up there in the crawl space. Maybe I bought it and forgot, or maybe my new roommate was taking his nightly glass of warm milk before bed. Except then the second day came around, and my apple was missing. Then the third day, my water bottle was empty. I didn't think much of it until I heard a sound above me one night. It was like a soft thump. I went to check it out, but everything was fine. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. A few days later, I was homesick from work and lying in bed watching TV, and I heard what sounded like whispering coming from above me. I got out of bed and went to check. As I was walking toward the closet, I could hear the scratching and shuffling noises above me.
Hours later,
I received a text message from an 80-year-old guy who introduces himself as the building maintenance guy. He opens the crawl space and shines a flashlight in. For the next 2 weeks, nothing strange happened. Then one morning, I woke up to find that my front door had been left unlocked. When the police arrived, I told them about the strange activity in the crawl space, the open door, and the open cupboards. Within 5 minutes, she emerged from the attic holding a blanket, a flashlight, and the missing apple. As for me, I never found another scratch on my walls or a misplaced item. Down in the comments, we had this story from Koala. And then we had this story from James B. My wife and I moved into a new house last year, and we've been busy renovating it. No, yes, actually, get rid of the drop ceiling. Next story is OP accidentally picks up a kidnapper. Our next Reddit post is from Sticks and Stones. Last Friday, I picked up a guy from a dive bar around midnight. He was alone, didn't speak, and wore a hoodie with the hood pulled low so that only half of his face was visible. He also stared out the window the entire ride. Normally, I don't have too much patience for silent riders, but it was late and I wasn't busy. I let it go. I drive for Uber on weekends to help pay for grad school. He did so without any fuss, and once he'd closed the door and I started the engine, he shouted, "No, wait, take me back." I waited patiently for him to come back out, but he never did. After about 10 minutes, I went inside to find him. He was nowhere to be seen. And then the cherry on top of the sundae was that the trip had cost me $60 instead of the $35 it should have. I picked it up and I saw that I had a message from the driver's app. At first I was frightened, but now I'm just mad. This guy deliberately tried to harm me and wasted the police and my time with his bullshit. Honestly, the whole experience has left me feeling violated. And on top of that, I lost sleep and money, and I had to keep taking classes. Like, seriously, am I the only one who thinks that this guy deserves more than just a slap on the wrist? Nothing. The police chalked it up to a strange case of hitchhiking gone wrong and closed the file. My sister-in-law quit driving Uber that night. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day. The guy who tried to kidnap me had apparently called me directly to complain that I had left him at the gas station. In the message, he called me a racial slur, accused me of trying to run him off the road. She was driving for Uber at night and got a pickup request from a woman at a local nightclub. She asked the woman if she wanted to switch drivers or if she wanted her to call the police, to which the woman responded, "No, you're fine. Just drive." About 2 miles later, the woman opened her eyes and looked normal for the first time. She then told my sister-in-law to pull over on the shoulder. As soon as they stopped, the woman flung open the door and ran out of the car. The woman then called out over her shoulder, "Sorry to leave you hanging, but I just had to get away from him." My sister-in-law watched her run off into the darkness. Then she called the police. When she arrived, she saw the woman talking to a man that she assumed was her date. The woman got into the car and everything seemed fine until they got onto the highway. Then the woman's date called from the passenger seat, "Hey, babe, take the exit for Main Street." My sister-in-law looked at the woman who had her eyes closed and didn't respond. Her date hung up the phone, and the woman calmly said to my sister-in-law, "Oh, ignore him. He's just jealous." She then directed my sister-in-law to drive past her actual exit and continue onto the freeway for another 5 miles, and threatened me with physical harm if I ever drove for Uber again. I figured this was probably because the fare calculation took into account the amount of time I spent waiting for the cops in the tow truck, which I suppose was fair enough. At this point, I was getting worried, because I was pretty sure that if he was planning on robbing me, he would have done so already. By this point, I was also angry and feeling violated because I had been deliberately lured into an isolated area by someone, would then use trickery and intimidation to steal a significant amount of time from me. Confused, I asked what he meant. I said, "Take me back," he screamed. The officer who took my statement was kind enough to understand how shaken I was, but his tone made it clear that he didn't believe me, and I think my story must have sounded insane. To him, I waited another hour for a tow truck to take my car back home because the police didn't have enough manpower to drive it themselves. "What do you want?" I yelled. "Do you want me to turn around?" "Yes," he yelled. "Do it." I complied without asking any questions, and after a few moments he calmed down and instructed me to go to the nearest gas station. But he never actually put a destination into the app, and he seemed to be deliberately vague with his verbal instructions. For example, take the second right after the bridge instead of turn right here in 200 feet. If I turned around at this point, I would have to drive through the woods essentially blind, because there were no streetlights in the trees. They were so thick that even the headlights couldn't penetrate them. And given that I now knew he was capable of being creepy and quiet, I decided that turning around would probably provoke him. So I continued on to the house he'd asked for. It added an extra 10 minutes onto the ride, which wouldn't have been so bad if he hadn't been so creepy. He eventually gave me directions to a house on the outskirts of town. You ever think about how easily you could disappear? I was immediately unsettled, but I played it cool and asked if he was all right. "Yeah," he says, leaning back and closing his eyes again, just thinking out loud. But then as we crested the last hill before the house, he suddenly said, "Stop here." I frowned and asked him to clarify, but he just shook his head. "Here's fine," he said vaguely. I looked left and right, and all I saw was trees. There was literally nothing there. I told him I couldn't stop in the middle of nowhere like this. But he insisted, and after a few moments of silence, I finally relented. That was the last coherent thing he said for the next 10 minutes. Then, about halfway through a very forested road, he leans forward, pushes his hood back so that we can see his face properly, and says in a low voice, "I considered ending the trip early, but the road he'd asked for was really secluded." It was a small, sparsely populated area, and I was relieved when I saw that the destination was in sight. I rolled down my window and asked him to get out. When we got there, he got out again and went inside. And so I called the police. They arrived quickly and I explained what had happened to them. And then I got home just in time for my Saturday classes. I had absolutely no time to rest or recover from the ordeal, and honestly, I was still pretty shaken. Then just as I was sitting down to have some breakfast and try to get some rest before my next class, my phone lit up. Obviously, I blocked his number and threw my phone back onto the table. Our next Reddit post is from DigB3. This happened to my sister-in-law a few years ago. At this point, my sister-in-law was understandably freaked out. After the police arrived and my brother picked her up, they checked her car for GPS trackers or anything else that might have been planted on it. Welcome to my channel. Today I will be reading from the r/no-sleep subreddit, so let's jump into the stories. The first one is titled The Baby Monitor. My wife and I had our first baby last spring. It's obviously sleep-deprived, paranoid, you know the drill. The same static followed by the voice saying, "I used to have one too." This happened a while ago and I've never told anyone about it until now. So here goes. I was staying in a remote cabin in the woods with my partner and 2 friends. None of us had cell service. In fact, as far as I remember, there was no TV either, but there was a radio which was tuned to a local station. Nobody had seen anyone enter or exit the cabin, and nobody had reported any missing equipment. Also hit that subscribe button because I put out new videos every single day. The deadbolt was apparently not loose when he checked it earlier, and there were no signs of forced entry. He also noted that the radio station we had been listening to broadcast late-night horror stories that weekend. It only took one night. That was it. Only took one night by Shoopdal Whoop. And if you like this kind of content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. There was also a record player and a whole bunch of old vinyl records. My friend suggested we play a game. He would turn the lights off and we would try to name the songs as he flipped through the records as quickly as possible. Since none of us knew the area well and we didn't want to use up all of our flashlight batteries, we agreed to leave one lamp turned on in the living room. She didn't make it. I haven't told anyone about this yet. I went through the collection as fast as I could, yelling out song titles until suddenly I heard a noise from the corner of the room. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, We searched the cabin inside and out, but found no signs of intrusion. And we were pretty sure that no one could have gotten in or out without us hearing them through the floorboards. Still, the door was a little ajar, and the deadbolt was loose enough to turn with only one person's strength. Also, we had left the windows open, and some expensive equipment was missing. So I called the police. An officer came out and filed a report. Seemed to think it was most likely teenagers playing a prank. But when I told him about the loose deadbolt, he said that he would look into it further. I froze and listened intently. The sound came again, footsteps near the front door. I yelled out to my friends to listen, and then we heard it again. Whoever was out there was slowly opening the door. The door creaked open, and I screamed. I turned the light off, and we huddled together in the corner. We listened intently. Silence. We started talking in hushed tones. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal. Then we heard it again. Someone clearing their throat. We waited. Footsteps closer now. I felt something brush against my leg. I screamed again. I don't want them to think I'm nuts. I called the police, who ran the IP address. All they found was that it was coming from a router at a private residence. Apparently it's not a crime unless you can prove intent or damages. They also said that because it was bouncing through dozens of proxies, it would be almost impossible to trace it any further. After that, I took the camera down and haven't put it back up yet. But every now and then, we still hear the static. Even though there's nothing plugged in anymore? Yeah, rightfully so. That's terrifying. That was the baby monitor by anonymous user 86,294. And if you like this kind of content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. So we set up one of those smart Wi-Fi monitors with night vision. I watched it constantly. Well, one night I woke up to what sounded like static over the baby monitor. I assumed it was glitching out. Then I heard a man's voice say, "She's beautiful." I jumped up and ran to the monitor and everything looked normal. But the app said that the feed had been accessed remotely. I tried to check the activity log, but the only thing it showed was that the feed had been accessed for 17 seconds by an unknown device. I had changed all the passwords when we set it up, and it was up to date with the latest firmware. I was more freaked out than tired, so I didn't get back in bed. Just sat in an armchair scrolling through security camera forums trying to find out how this could have happened. I couldn't find anything similar. Most people thought it was just a glitch. A few said that it was probably just a hacker testing their system. And a couple mentioned that they had heard similar things happening with Google. It's a baby monitor system where it would randomly switch to another person's camera feed. And if you were unlucky, the other person would be doing some messed up stuff. I shrugged it off as a one-off and went to bed. The next night it happened again. And the next one is titled, "It Only Took One Night." After we started the game, it was my turn to flip through the records. We made it through the night without seeing or hearing anything else. When he came back later that day, he told me that he had checked with the locals,